Hello, everybody, and welcome into the Star Wars Legends Lounge, the show that celebrates the books from Star Wars Legends. I'm Aaron Moats. Coming up on today's show, we wrap up the Han Solo adventures. Han and Chewie leave the corporate sector and head to the Tian hegemony. They take a quick smuggling job when they run into an old friend who tells them he has a lead on an ancient tyrant's money vault. Han and Chewie join the search for the treasure, but little do our heroes know, they're being hunted by the galaxy's most dangerous gunfighter. It's Han Solo and the Lost Legacy by Brian Daley, and I'll talk about the book coming up in a few moments. But first, it's listener question time. Today's email comes from Benjamin. Benjamin says, I've always loved the lore and legends about Star Wars, and you've encouraged me to buy the Legends books. Right now, I'm reading Young Jedi Knights, The Emperor's Plague, so I thank you for opening a new world to me. Well, you're very welcome, Benjamin, and thank you very much for the kind words. Benjamin continues, I finally caught up with your episodes, and I'm glad to hear the stories about gamblers and scoundrels. Even if it's the characters we've all grown to know, it's nice to hear about Star Wars stories that don't have to do with the Force. It helps me envision just how big the universe is. My question is, if we could get one movie or show from Star Wars without it focusing on the Force, what story would you like to see on the screen? Well, thank you very much for the question, Benjamin. Honestly, my answer is Rogue Squadron, one of the projects that Lucasfilm announced a few years ago, but now it seems is no longer in development. I've always been a sucker for a story about a tight-knit military group like Band of Brothers, Force 10 from Navarone, The Dirty Dozen, Top Gun, and from the sound of it, Rogue Squadron was going to be a lot like Top Gun, but in space. And those types of stories about a small, tight-knit group battling against the odds are what I prefer in Star Wars as well. I love the Umbaran arc in the Clone Wars animated show with Rex and Fives and Jesse and the rest of the 501st. And, of course, Rogue One and Andor are two of my favorite Star Wars stories in live action. And, of course, they both feature aspects of that tight-knit group of people fighting for a cause and fighting against each other sometimes. That's why I was looking forward to Rogue Squadron so much. And that's why I'm bummed that it seems like Lucasfilm has moved on from the project. However, even though I was really looking forward to Rogue Squadron, I would prefer to see it as a series rather than the planned movie. And honestly, I think I'd prefer to see it as an animated series. To me, two of the coolest parts of Star Wars Celebration a few weeks ago were the Star Wars Animation panel and the Star Wars Vision panel. The animation panel talked about all the cool things that Lucasfilm Animation has produced over the last 20 years, and to me, Visions is one of the coolest animation projects that they've done over that time. So, those two panels got me thinking, how cool would it be to see a Rogue Squadron anime series? Give me an anime show that spans 3 seasons, 15 to 16 episodes per season, and it tells the story of the Rogues either taking on an elite Imperial fighter wing or helping mop up the Imperial remnant. How cool would spaceship anime dogfighting look? X-Wings and TIE fighters zooming across the screen, pulling 180s, 360s, drifting, barrel rolls. Plus, it's a lot easier to break the laws of physics in animation than it is in live action. Not only would a Rogue Squadron series be my most wanted Star Wars project that does not focus on the Force, it's the story that I most want to see in all of Star Wars. Thanks again for the question, Benjamin. Now, listener, if you have a question that you'd like me to answer on the show, you can send me an email at swlegendslounge@gmail.com or send me a message on Twitter, Instagram, or Blue Sky at swlegendslounge. And if you'd like to get your voice on the show, you can record a short message and email it in. But please record it in MP3 audio format. Now it's time for today's book, Han Solo and the Lost Legacy by Brian Daley. Grab yourself a drink. Let's head in to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. The story begins on the planet Rodrig. Han Solo and Chewbacca have left the corporate sector to try and make some money in the Tian hegemony. And because things had become a little too hot in the corporate sector after the two helped expose the slavery ring that was operating inside the corporate sector authority. Han and Chewie do a couple of small jobs for the University of Rodrig when they run into one of their old smuggling pals, Badur, a man Han first met back in the Imperial Navy. Badur isn't doing so well. He's no longer working as a smuggler. Credits have gotten so tight, in fact, that Badur says he's been doing manual labor for an illegal mining operation on the planet Dalalt. But Badur is not alone. Han notices a young woman tagging along with him. Her name is Hosti Trujo. Badur says he took Hosti and her sister Lani under his wing, protecting them from some of the more dangerous people in the mining camp. Badur and Hosti are looking to hire a cargo ship and a couple of pilots who aren't afraid to work outside the law. Badur tells Han and Chewie that Lani had discovered a data disk that points the way to the lost treasure of the ancient warlord Zim the Despot. Badur says Lani stashed the disk before the crime boss running the mining operation, a woman named Juak, killed Lani for the disk. Han initially refuses to join up with Badur, but Chewie convinces him, and they decide to help their friend. Together with a Rurian history professor named Skinks and the droids Bollux and Blue Max, the group heads off to search for Zim's treasure. The Millennium Falcon lands on Dalalt, and our heroes discuss the best way to begin their search. But the group does not go unnoticed. Someone at the spaceport contacts Juak. The crime boss leads a band of cronies to confront our heroes as they leave the spaceport. Juak orders them to hand over the disk that Lani had hid. Hosti and Badur refuse because, of course, they haven't found the disk yet. Both sides pull their blasters, and the scene quickly devolves into a full-on firefight. Juak's gang has the numbers. Han and Badur tell the others to run, but the gang is blocking the way to the Falcon. Han is devastated, but it's clear that the only way to live is to head off into the fields surrounding the spaceport. Han takes one last look at his beloved ship, turns, and sprints away. But he vows to get the Falcon back and to get even with Juak. Han leads the group through the fields when they eventually arrive at a lake. Passage across the lake is controlled by enormous talking plesiosaurs, and the docks are run by a group of thugs that are partnering with the huge sea serpents. Han and Badur don't have the credits required to pay the toll at the docks, but just when they think they may have to spend days hiking around the lake, an older, one-eyed plesiosaur offers them free passage. Why? Well, because the group of younger serpents near the docks have run out all the others. They're monopolizing transport across the lake. The group jumps on the older serpent's boat and starts across the water. Of course, their pilot is challenged by the leader of the young serpents. The two great beasts battle on the water, sinking their fangs into each other's hides and using their long necks to batter each other's heads. Just when Han thinks their boat is about to capsize, the old plesiosaur chomps down on the younger one's neck. Hard. The younger serpent concedes and swims away, leaving the older winner to ferry our heroes across the lake. Han is ready to head back to the spaceport to get the Falcon back, but Badur tells him to stop. "Think about it, Slick," he says. "Juwak thinks we know where Lonnie hid the data disk, and she knows that we're searching for Zim's treasure. She's not going to leave the Falcon at the spaceport. Badur says she's going to take it to the mining camp. That's where Lonnie was when she hid the disk." The group continues on, heading up through the mountains toward the mines. Of course, the trek is not easy, and it's not just the terrain. The group is attacked and captured by a tribe of people who call themselves the Survivors, the descendants of the crew of Zim's treasure ship that crashed on Dalalt centuries ago. The Survivors imprison our heroes in a cave lined with ancient writing. Skinks is able to translate some of the characters. It seems that the Survivors have been waiting for Zim to return, and that includes taking care of the Despot's army of ancient war robots about 3 times the size of a human being. Fortunately for our heroes, the Survivors don't imprison Bollux and Blue Max. Apparently, they don't consider the droids to be threats. The Survivors actually allow Bollux to move freely throughout the camp. Soon, the old labor droid and Blue Max find the captain of the war robots. The ancient battle droid says they will soon march down the mountain to the mining camp. It turns out, Juwak doesn't realize it, but she's getting close to finding Zim's hidden treasure. The Survivors haul our heroes out to the center of their camp and prepare to sacrifice them. But Bollux and Blue Max intervene and free the prisoners. The group rushes down the side of the mountain to the mining camp and to the Millennium Falcon, with the Survivors and the war robots in hot pursuit. Han and Chewie keep the rest of the group together and protect them from the Survivors when they make it to the mining camp. But out of the frying pan and straight into the fire. Juwak is waiting for them, of course, and not only is she surrounded by her gang, she's brought in someone else, someone deadly. Galandro, the most dangerous gunman in the galaxy. Han and Badur are frantic. They try to convince Juwak about the army of war droids coming down the mountain. Of course, the crime boss doesn't believe them. But soon, everyone feels it when the ground begins to rumble. The war robots burst through the trees, and the scene descends into chaos. They march through the camp, tearing apart people and machinery alike. And some of them start heading toward the Falcon. Han and Chewie sprint through the camp, trying desperately to make it to their ship. But there's no way they're going to make it through the madness. No way, that is, until Galandro clears them a path, taking out about a half dozen war droids with blaster shots straight to the head. Chewie preps the ship for liftoff while Han and Galandro usher Badur, Halti, Skinks, and Bollux and Blue Max aboard, the Falcon lifts off, escaping the mining camp turned war zone, and the group heads back to the Delolt spaceport. The Falcon lands, and Skinks leads the group to where he believes Zim's treasure vault is buried. When they arrive at the vault, Skinks and Han head inside, but Galandro follows them. The gunslinger doesn't just want a cut of the treasure. He wants revenge on Han Solo for embarrassing him on Amud. Galandro challenges Han to a standoff in the tunnels. Han's luck is infamous, but he's no match for Galandro's speed draw. The gunman shoots Han in his gun shoulder, disabling him. Skinks then escapes the scene and runs deeper into the tunnels. Galandro follows the professor until he corners the Rurian in front of one of the vault doors. It's time to eliminate witnesses. Galandro pulls his blaster on Skinks, when suddenly dozens of laser bolts fry the gunslinger where he stands. It turns out Skinks wasn't running away. The professor was drawing Galandro into an area of the tunnels where Zim's ancient anti-weapon security system was still active. Skinks leads the group to the entrance to Zim's treasure vault. The professor opens the door, and inside, our heroes find Kyrium ingots and Mytag crystals? Those aren't valuable, Han says. Kyrium and Mytag crystals were used in starship armor and communications units centuries ago. Nobody uses them today. Why would Zim save all this stuff? Because, Skinks says, these were the pinnacle of military technology centuries ago in Zim's era. The story ends with Skinks offering Badur, Halti, Bollux, and Blue Max jobs helping the professor catalog and transport the artifacts in Zim's vault back to the University of Ruria. Han and Chewie load up the few artifacts that they can pawn off for fuel money and then head off to Ord Mantell. Han plans to offer their services running spice out of Kessel to the notorious gangster Jabba the Hutt. Time to take a break. When we return, I'll talk more about Han Solo and the Lost Legacy. I'm Aaron Moats. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. Thank you for listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge, where we celebrate the books from Star Wars Legends. But let me take a moment and recommend a book from Star Wars canon. Thrawn Alliances is the story of how the Grand Admiral first met Darth Vader. The two team up to stop an Imperial threat on the backwater planet Batuu. The mission causes Thrawn to remember a trip he made to Batuu for the Chiss Expeditionary Forces, and Lord Vader reminds him an awful lot like a young Republic general he met there years before. Check out Thrawn Alliances by Timothy Zahn. Welcome back to the Star Wars Legends Lounge, the show that celebrates the books from Star Wars Legends. I'm Aaron Moats, and today I'm talking about Han Solo and the Lost Legacy by Brian Daley, the third and final story in the classic Han Solo adventures. You know, I really enjoy all of the Han Solo adventure stories. However, like many Star Wars series, whether they're movie trilogies or book trilogies or 9-book series or the 19-book New Jedi Order series, regardless of the length, in my opinion, the last entry of the series is usually just a little bit of a letdown. And again, as much as I like the Han Solo adventures, I would say that the first two stories, Han Solo at Star's End and Han Solo's Revenge are a step above this story, Han Solo and the Lost Legacy. I like the story. I just think the story is slightly anticlimactic for the series. It's similar to the original trilogy, the era that I grew up in, the part of the Star Wars story that I revere most. A New Hope, The Empire Strikes Back, in my opinion, are basically masterpieces. I love them. Return of the Jedi is one of my favorite Star Wars movies. I think it's one of the most fun movies there is. And personally, I find the resolution of Luke and Darth Vader's story perfectly satisfying. But even I have to admit that there are aspects of the final movie of the original trilogy that I think are probably just a step below the highs of the first two installments of the original trilogy. And I think that carries over to most Star Wars series. Han Solo and the Lost Legacy, in my opinion, is more like an Indiana Jones story than a Star Wars story. Now, don't get me wrong, that's not a bad thing. Who doesn't like an adventure? Who doesn't like a treasure quest? For those of you who watch the Disney Plus shows, we just had one recently with Skeleton Crew last winter. I really enjoyed Skeleton Crew. It was a really fun adventure story. It was a really fun treasure quest. I'd love to get more from those characters. But in the Han Solo adventures, when pairing the final installment, Han Solo and the Lost Legacy, with the previous two, there are portions of this final story that for me just don't quite fit. I hope I'm making myself clear when I say that. I'm not saying that this is a bad story. I'm not saying that I don't like this story. I'm just saying that it doesn't seem to flow with the previous two. I like the interactions in Han Solo and the Lost Legacy between Han and Badur. In the Legends continuity, Han is a pilot candidate in the Imperial Navy. He gets run out of the Navy for striking a superior officer who is abusing the Wookiee slaves that the Empire is using to build battleships, to build the Death Star, to build other war materiel. Han strikes his superior and saves Chewbacca. That's where the Wookiee life debt comes from in the Legends continuity. Han, of course, gets drummed out of the Imperial Navy. Badur also leaves the Imperial Navy. In fact, the incident that leads Badur to eventually resigning his commission and leaving the Imperial Navy was when Han, as a cadet, managed the miracle landing of a malfunctioning starship. Han takes control of the ship from his pilot instructor, lands the ship, saving everyone on board, And yet, the instructor tries to cover up the incident. The event furthers Badur's disillusionment with the Imperial Navy, and eventually he resigns his commission and gets out and becomes a smuggler in his own right. I think the interactions between Han and Badur are some of my favorite parts in this story. How they debate their roles in both the Imperial Navy and as smugglers. Badur serving as somewhat of an Obi-Wan Kenobi-like wise elder in this story to Han. Han, of course, at this time is young. He's a bit of a hothead. He wants to attack Juok and her gang to get the Millennium Falcon back. Badur is the voice of reason, saying, the Falcon is going to be no use to you if you're dead. The only way to get your ship back is to escape, live to fight another day, and to come up with a plan and to bypass Juok and her minions. Badur also occasionally talks to Han about how the smuggling life isn't nearly as romantic, and the thrill-seeking of working on the other side of the law isn't as exhilarating as Han likes to say it is. On some level, it seems like Han continually talks about the grandeur of being a smuggler, on some level to convince himself that what he is doing, the occupation that he has chosen for himself, is as glamorous as he likes to say it is. Badur in this story is occasionally a check on Han and his braggadocious personality at times. For me, the quest for Zim the Despot's treasure isn't as interesting as I think it could have been. It's just a series of our group continually either being stopped by another group of people or being captured momentarily by another group of people. And then our group of heroes escape to continue their trek across the Dalault wilderness in search of information about Zim's treasure. It happens 4 times. And it's not like this is a long story. It was just a bit repetitive for me. I did really like the scenes with Bollux and Blue Max talking to the war droids. These really tall, really large robots that are described as about 3 times the height of a human being. In my head, I picture some of the depictions of robots in those black and white 1950s science fiction B movies. A very plain face, a very plain front, very boxy on some levels. And here you have Bollux, a labor droid, and the little supercomputer Blue Max that lives in his chest. much more in the style of modern day droids that we are used to seeing in Star Wars. Of course, they look like toddlers next to these huge war droids, but they're interacting with them. They're talking to them. They're asking, what is your purpose? And of course, the war droids not understanding that there are other robots out there whose purpose isn't war, isn't fighting, isn't defending their owner. One of the ways our heroes are able to escape when the war droids attack the mining complex is Blue Max sends out a little signal that changes the programming of the war droids that are closest to the group as they are escaping to the Millennium Falcon, telling them that these humans that Skinks the Rurian, they are not bad people. You can destroy everything else, you can kill everyone else, but leave this small group alone. And then, of course, the end of the book, when we finally get to Zim's treasure vault. Now, for anyone who knows anything about Han Solo, you knew he wasn't going to get rich off of this venture. The whole book, they build up that Zim has riches, the likes that nobody in the galaxy had ever seen, that he was wealthier than planets, that he was wealthier than entire systems. But of course, the first time we meet Han Solo is only about a year later in the Mos Eisley Cantina, where he is begging for work in order to get the credits to pay down the debt that he owes Jabba the Hutt. So we know at the end of the book, Han's not going to be rich. It's not like it comes as a surprise that the treasure isn't something of monetary value in the present in the galaxy far, far away. That twist at the end, it's not much of a twist, but I guess it is a little bit of a twist. I like that little twist at the end, that Zim's treasure vault is just lined with some of the most valuable things from his era. It's full of curium ingots and Mytag crystals. Things that centuries ago were cutting edge technology in the production of warships. Unless you have no knowledge of the Star Wars universe and specifically the character of Han Solo, going into the Han Solo adventures, the ending of this book doesn't come as much of a surprise. Han has to be down on his luck at the beginning of A New Hope. And he's not going to be down on his luck if he finds a treasure only a year before. A treasure that most likely would have been so large that he would never have to engage in smuggling activity ever again. So while I am not as big of a fan of Han Solo and the Lost Legacy as I am of the previous two entries in the Han Solo adventures, there's a lot in this story that is fun. There's a lot in this story that is really cool to read. The Han Solo adventures are some of the most revered stories in Legends, particularly among fans that are a little bit older than myself. I'm 47. I would say some of these fans that are probably 55 to 65 years old, some of their favorite Legends stories are these 3 Han Solo adventures. Many of them revere Han Solo at Star's End the same way they revere A New Hope, or The Empire Strikes Back, or Return of the Jedi. Personally, my favorite story in the trilogy is the second one, Han Solo's Revenge. It's the one that resonates the most to me. But while Han Solo and the Lost Legacy is the one, in my opinion, that's just a tiny step down from the other two, it's also the one that we have probably seen the most influence in canon. Zim the Despot is mentioned in a couple canon books. First, in the 2017 reference book, Star Wars The Last Jedi, Incredible Cross Sections, written by Jason Fry. Zim is also mentioned in Solo, A Star Wars Story, Tales from Vandor, and Star Wars The Smuggler's Guide. And in the movie Solo, A Star Wars Story, in Dryden Voss's yacht, amongst the treasures and the artifacts that he has on display, one of them is a MyTag crystal masthead. It's in the shape of Zim's skull. It is the symbol of Zim the Despot. And if anyone has seen the cover of Han Solo and the Lost Legacy, right in the middle is the glowing blue MyTag crystal skull with sparkling eyes. That is Zim's sigil. I'll admit, I didn't notice it right away when watching Solo, A Star Wars Story. I did not notice it until second viewing of the movie. But it was a really cool inclusion for a Star Wars fan who has read the Han Solo adventures and who knows a little bit about some of the little things from Legends that have been sprinkled into canon. If you didn't know anything about it, it was just a cool artifact that was in Dryden Voss's lounge there in Solo. But if you did know about it, it was one of those things that made you point at the screen like that Leonardo DiCaprio meme, and you're like, I know what that is. It was really cool. It was really cool. Well, listener, it's time to go. If you have something you'd like to share with me, a question, an opinion, or a comment, you can send me an email at swlegendslounge@gmail.com or send me a message on Twitter, Instagram, or Blue Sky at swlegendslounge. And don't forget to send in your favorite Star Wars character groupings. I love reading the messages that each of you send in. Now, coming up on the next episode of the podcast, we jump ahead almost 2 decades to the New Republic era. Leia faces her first crisis as the new Chief of State, while Luke searches for information about their mother and to see if she might even still be alive. Tune in May 16th for Before the Storm by Michael P. Kube McDowell, the first book in the Black Fleet Crisis trilogy. Thank you so much for listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. I'm Aaron Moats. May the Force be with you. And remember, there's always a bit of truth in legends.